The Moors murders were a series of child killings committed by Ian Brady and Myra Hindley in and around Manchester, England, between July 1963 and October 1965. The victims were 5 children: Pauline Reed, John Kilbride, Keith Bennett, Leslie Ann Downey and Edward Evans, aged between 10 and 17, at least 4 of whom were sexually assaulted. The bodies of 2 of the victims were discovered in 1965 in graves dug on Saddleworth Moor. A 3rd grave was discovered there in 1987, more than 20 years after Brady and Hindley's trial. Bennett's body is also thought to be buried there, but despite repeated searches, it remains undiscovered. The pair were charged only for the murders of Kilbride, Downey and Evans, and received concurrent life sentences under a whole life tariff. The investigation was reopened in 1985 after Brady was reported as having confessed to the murders of Reed and Bennett. Hindley stopped claiming her innocence in 1987 and confessed to all of the murders. After confessing to these additional murders, Brady and Hindley were taken separately to Saddleworth Moor to assist in the search for the graves. Characterised by the press as the most evil woman in Britain, Hindley made several appeals against her life sentence, claiming she was a reformed woman and no longer a danger to society, but was never released. It was reported that notorious child killer Myra Hindley died in 2002 of bronchial pneumonia in West Suffolk Hospital, aged 60, after serving 36 years in prison. Hindley was cremated in Cambridge Crematorium. None of her family attended the short service. Such was the strength of feeling against Hindley more than 35 years after the murders that a reported 20 local undertakers refused to handle her cremation. 4 months later, her ashes were scattered by her ex-partner, Patricia Cairns, less than 10 miles from Saddleworth Moor in the wooded valleys of Stalybridge Country Park, supposedly. In May 1966, when Ian Brady and Myra Hindley were given life sentences, Justice Fenton Atkinson, the trial judge, recommended they should spend a very long time in prison. The Daily Express reported that files released by the National Archives in 2017 showed that, in 1985, in line with policy at the time, their cases came up for review for the first time by the Parole Board. Home Secretary Leon Brittan advised the Prime Minister that Hindley could theoretically go free after having served 30 years in prison, while Brady could be released after 40 years. The suggestion provoked a furious reaction from Mrs. Thatcher, who was adamant that they should both die behind bars. In a memorandum to the Prime Minister, Mr. Brittan said that while he did not expect the board to recommend their release on this occasion, there would come a time when they could be safely released into the public. At present, I have in mind a tariff of 30 years for Hindley and 40 years for Brady, implying that after 1992 and 2002 respectively, the question of release, in 1995 and 2005 at the earliest, will be determined on risk grounds rather than on grounds of retribution or deterrence, he wrote. Mrs. Thatcher, however, was having none of it. I think the sentences you are proposing are too short, she wrote. I do not think that either of these prisoners should ever be released from custody. Their crime was the most hideous and cruel of modern times. In that same year, 1985, 20 years after she was convicted, Lord Lane, then Lord Chief Justice, recommended a 25-year tariff for Hindley. Hindley was unable to make any progress through the UK justice system, the divisional courts dismissing her application for judicial review of the whole life tariff, which she appealed and was again dismissed by the Court of Appeal. But they gave her leave to appeal to the House of Lords. The House of Lords ultimately rejected Hindley's claims, but they left a loophole for the Home Secretary to reconsider her case in light of any exceptional progress she made. In September 2000, Hindley had then turned to the European Court of Human Rights, which had previously rejected whole life sentences, as had most European jurisdictions at the time. In May 2002, the European Court of Human Rights had ruled in the Stafford versus the United Kingdom parole judgment that Home Secretaries had no power to overrule a parole board's decision, ruling it should not be the Home Secretary's decision to keep him in jail. The Mail reported, Home Secretary David Blunkett has pledged to bring in a new law establishing his right to determine how long killers serve. But the speed at which judges are moving towards releasing the Moors murderous will give him no chance to push legislation through in time. Citing the Stafford case as precedent, the European Court of Human Rights would most likely have also overturned Hindley's whole life sentence, and therefore enabled the possibility of her release via parole. Had this scenario played out in public, this could have resulted in large-scale civil unrest, quite possibly extensive rioting, and reflected disastrously on the incumbent government, with the general public blaming the government for the release of a notorious and a universally hated figure, instrumental in the targeted and despicable, heinous abuse and murder of young children, even though the government of the time would have quite rightly denied culpability for the decision to release Myra Hindley as a result to changes in international law and decisions and actions by the judiciary. The media and public opinion would have galvanized, which would have led to the ruling administration's ability, competence, and morality being called into question for allowing such things to happen, and, more than likely, resulted in that government eventually losing office and power, for quite possibly a generation being branded unjustly as child killer sympathizers. So a solution by the ruling administration, the government, would have needed to be found to mitigate and avoid this impending disastrous scenario. The most plausible actions being to stage Hindley's death from natural causes, using previously reported health issues and subsequently providing her with lifelong anonymity and a new identity, most probably relocating her abroad with an income for life. Those incentives and the dangers posed to her if she were released back into society would have guaranteed Hindley's compliance, silence, and anonymity. The convenience of her death being reported before her case could be heard at the European Court of Human Rights, and also being 10 days before the British Parliamentary Law Lords ruled that tariffs for prisoners, including whole life tariffs, would no longer be decided by British Home Secretaries, was indeed very convenient. So the question remains, who was in government when Myra Hindley died? The government at the time of her reported death was a Labour government. So did a Labour government secretly release child killer Myra Hindley? Add your thoughts to the comments and don't forget to subscribe.